Right, greetings everybody. Welcome to episode 37 of Relentless. This one is quite the special episode of Relentless. My wonderful, beautiful Relentless guest this evening is none other than David THRUSSELL. Let me add him to the stage. Hi David, how are you?
Hello Robin, hello viewers. Thank you for having me on. It's nice to see you.
You too, and I'm sure the viewers are thrilled to see you as well. That's for sure.
You're too kind, Robin. I'm undeserving of your kudos, but thank you anyway.
So I've been looking forward to speaking to you about this topic because I've been thinking about it very deeply for a long time, and I've been able to give a couple of talks about this, and I really wanted to have someone on and discuss this even further, because I think it's really important for people to really grasp this so that they can be free within themselves, because we have a state of affairs where our perception is being manipulated at the moment. And of course, I'm talking about fifth generational warfare. So it's 5GW, and it has nothing to do with phone towers, right?
All right.
No.
I'll make a note of that. Thank you.
Yes. So yeah, I think really understanding it, and particularly with mainstream media, how mainstream media is weaponized and the tools that they use to change your perception and deceive people, I think is really, really important for people to understand and be able to identify how they do that. So that's
a big topic, Robin. To be honest, it's a big topic. There's hours and hours of things that could reasonably be said here. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Very big topic.
So I thought we'll start off with a quick video, because we're talking about, fifth generational warfare. So, some people might be thinking, well, what's 1, 2, 3, and 4, which we can talk about as well. But I thought, let's play this little video. Now, this is from Steve Cutts. It's called A Brief Disagreement. It's not necessarily about 5GW, but I think it is a nice introduction. So let's add that to the stage. I think it's about 2 minutes. We can enjoy this.
Gosh, that was intense, wasn't it? I can't hear you. I don't know if you can hear me, but I can't hear you, Robin. Anyway, yeah.
I'm back.
Oh, great. At first I thought it was pretty funny, actually, and I was kind of laughing along, and I was thinking, well, that's just like any old weekend here, isn't it? Basically, that's what us hillbillies do for kicks, at the start. But then it gets pretty intense, doesn't it? And it made me think of all these poor suffering people in Gaza, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and there's not much to make light of there, obviously. I also thought, not completely, of course, not completely, but in one sense, it's kind of the history of the human race, isn't it? I mean, there is a history of conflict there, and I'm not supposing that's the whole story. Of course, there's also great beauty and heroism and all sorts of other things involved in the story of the human race, but there also is a large element of conflict, isn't there?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and one of the things I really think about, particularly after watching that, is I know on Cafe Locked-Out, we often ask the question, what is freedom, and we're always trying to define that. And what I tend to ask myself is, how do we know we're not free? And that little animation there, leads me to think we're not free when we're outsourcing our thinking to third parties, and when we have situations, whatever stage of warfare, and you just mentioned Gaza and Israel, there people are consuming the mainstream media narrative and outsourcing their thinking there, and it always brings me back to the thought that we're not free when we're outsourcing our thinking like that, and so
it's a great point, Robin. I think you're making an excellent point, and I would just distill that into very simple terms, which is how I think about it, and that is about personal responsibility. We've given over so much personal responsibility to all these institutions, governments and bureaucracies and media and all these things. We, as you rightly say, we've outsourced so much of ourselves, our thinking, as you correctly point out, and I would argue our personal responsibility as well, our personal volition, all sorts of things. And I'd argue as well, and I'm sure you were probably about to go there, that we've also outsourced our morality and our ethics. And really, I don't want to be too grim about this, but we really, as a species, we've been very good at handing over our personal power and our personal responsibility to other forces.
Yep.
And I've long been suspicious of those forces myself, and the last couple of years, excuse me, I think it's become painfully obvious that was a mistake.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Well, so I want to come around to that. So our that.
Well, can I ask you a question first, Robin? Can I humbly ask you a question?
Yeah.
You wanted to talk about fifth generational warfare. Give me your definition of what that is in your view.
Yeah, so fifth generational warfare, my understanding of that is they
you can say they. I think we have an inkling.
Are used against us. So things like, psychological operations and even algorithmic activities that sort of nudge us to changing our perception of what is actually true. And, I was having a think about it the other day. How does that differ from propaganda? Because propaganda has been used forever, especially during wartime. But when we're thinking about fifth generational warfare, it's really about manipulating people's perception and using tools that don't require, territory or force or bullets or, tanks or anything like that to have an effect on people,
So would it be fair to put it in other terms, another term, and describe it as psychological warfare? Is that a fair term to use?
Yeah. Well, our mind is now the battlefield, isn't it? It's not.
It's very clearly is, isn't it? Yeah. And I mean, we were kind of warned of this. Various, interesting people did declare over recent decades that the next world war would be an information war. It would be a psychological war, and it would be a war, perhaps they were suggesting, waged by governments, and I deliberately put that in quotation marks, waged by governments against their own populations. In fact, you could argue, I think reasonably compellingly, you could argue that the 20th century, the century gone by, has many and very large examples of what in essence are governments at war against their own populations, really, and they externalized it. I mean, I honestly think the First World War is a pretty good example of this. I think that was an incredibly needless, pointless conflict. Even my dearly beloved grandfather was horrendously wounded in that and scarred for the rest of his life in certain ways. And it strikes me, knowing a little bit of the history, not saying I'm an expert, but knowing a little bit of the history, how completely unnecessary and bizarre it was, really. And that this really is even events like that, major events like that, are kind of organized in a way where it becomes obvious, I would argue, that the general population are just cannon fodder. They're just kind of a herd that's pushed into this meat grinder for purposes that really are not in their interests at all. I mean, I think of my grandfather, but of course there's millions of other examples, people who had no say or nothing to benefit from this insane conflict and were just used for other purposes, whatever those purposes may be. They certainly were not their purposes as individual people, So I think we've already seen this very clearly, this situation where we have these structures, and I would argue they're actually very illegitimate structures. You can call them the government if you want, media, the money system, the banking system, the education, quote, system, all these systems, which I think it's become painfully obvious are not operating in our benefit, and they are part of, what you're describing here, this kind of 5G psychological warfare. I mean, I look, forgive me, but I always like to go really big picture about these things because I think we need to be as honest as we can be, and I think we need to really grapple with the reality of these situations if we're going to have any success, or even if we're going to even just stay as sane as we can manage. I would argue, and I know it's a volatile word, and I know people will get upset about this word and whatever, but I find myself thinking about the word slavery a lot. And what does that word mean? And I know there's a historical meaning for that word, and it's an ugly historical meaning, and I understand that. But, what does slavery, in essence, what does it mean? Does it mean, being controlled and manipulated for purposes that aren't your own? And it might mean that you're chained and working on a chain gang or something, ugly like this. But does it also mean that you spend the bulk of your life, perhaps the best years of your life, working for somebody else? And paying off a mortgage, which just profits somebody else, really. You're just nose to the grindstone zone for 30 or 40 years or whatever it might be, generating profit for somebody at a remote location. Is that a form of slavery? I would argue that it is an economic form of slavery to do that, to not be working for your own improvement of your own situation or the improvement of the situation of your children or your family or whoever,
I'm wondering if we can add to that as well, because we started off, just talking a little bit there about how we hand over our personal responsibility and our moral responsibility. When we start thinking about, 5GW and what they're actually doing, I start to wonder, because we're being manipulated into being slaves in many different ways, does that then sort of shoot off into that we're not actually now handing over our personal responsibility? It's been underhandedly taken away from us, and we're sort of corralled into this slavery, as you're talking about, not only monetarily but also morally, all these
psychically,
things.
Morally. Yeah, absolutely. I totally understand your point, and I think your point is a very good one, because I am disappointed, speaking very generally, that we have given away our personal responsibility and personal volition. I think that was a mistake, and that was laziness on our part. But I also agree that we're not entirely to blame for that. There are forces which, to some degree, are beyond many people's understanding. I actually think they're beyond all of our understandings to different degrees. But there are forces that, and your word choice is a very good one, that are deliberately corralling us and robbing us of our power as a community, as a society, and as families and individuals. There is definitely a force of darkness, I would argue, that is deliberately robbing us of our potential as human beings, and I'm going to go pretty meta here, and forgive me if I go too big picture, but I actually think this has been going on for a long, long time. And I think, we have all sorts of scriptures and ancient knowledge and things that to one degree or another warn us about this battle that is, frankly, in my view, a battle between good and evil. And that part of that is this battle for the souls of us, our souls, but also this battle for physical control of us and emotional control of us and spiritual control of us. There's been a battle going on for a long time, I would suggest, but it's the gloves have come off, and they've made it fairly plain. I think I'm still dumbfounded, and I'm quite naive in some ways, and I sadly admit that I'm still dumbfounded when I speak with people who appear to have absolutely no inkling that there is this great game, this great play afoot to capture us. And, and as you absolutely rightly said, to corral us, to keep us on the plantation, or to enslave us even more than ever before. I mean, it's been a battle for a long time. And, different people have different responses to this, which I understand. Some people have a spiritual response, some people have a physical response, and some people have no response whatsoever, unfortunately, I think. But that's...
Well, it's funny you mentioned... Yeah, no, that... about people not realizing that, there's something going on. I just did a video yesterday, and it was about two mothers who had this exchange on Twitter, and they were talking about how do we find a great place to take our children to be jabbed, because our two different families, our children have witnessed us dropping after our jabs and being rushed to hospital, and they want a doctor's surgery, that doesn't have a lot of wait time so the kids don't get anxious. And, one of the ladies was recommending one that's got balloons there and all sorts of things. And I finished the video, and, I said, what was, I still am, it blows my mind that people are that dumb. People are still that dumb,
Sure.
with even the little bits of information, and I have a video about this later, the little bits of information that mainstream media, these prostitutes put in the media about, whether it's AstraZeneca, or whatever, those little bits of truth, people still aren't connecting those little pieces of the puzzle, So
I empathize. It's breathtaking. It's kind of horrid as well. I mean, we can make light of it and we can, comment on how dumb they are and all that sort of stuff. And that's all kind of true, unfortunately. But it's also horrid, Yeah. I mean, it's horrid for those children. It's kind of, it's really, honestly, it's really quite dark. If you kind of want to analyze that, it's pretty dark, isn't it? Really, it's like, giving the cattle lollipops before they go to the slaughterhouse, kind of thing. Like it's where are their instincts? These people, where are their parental instincts? You know this, that as a parent, as a mother or father, your highest priority, your highest duty is the physical safety of your children. That is your number one priority, and this has been really tested in recent times. And I'm really questioning where are these people's instincts? They're just completely turned off, aren't they? They've just abrogated any kind of human instinct. It appears to me.
Yeah. And then I asked myself, are they turned off, or is this psychological operation really succeeding and getting the job done? Because we have, in this circumstance, clearly they must have, well, I would say they have a high level of trust in the government. They don't trust their instinct, which is a success in making people powerless, because that's what they want. So they have a high level of trust in the government, don't trust their own instincts. And, if they even let it enter their mind, any of the things that we talk about as far as truth, and especially these jabs is concerned, that word conspiracy theorist always comes up. And we know that that's been weaponized. And so that whole sort of conglomeration together,
Well, I feel like what we're talking about there is something that I've really noticed, and I've noticed it for a long time, is this what I would call the infantilization, turning people into infants or arresting their development, keeping them in a state of arrested development so that they behave like infants. And I mean, I think this is, talking of psychological warfare, this is a deliberate project that's been going on for a long time. And it has, sadly, as you point out, been really very successful. And that's really quite upsetting, really. But, this attempt to really keep people in this infantile state has largely, and I would suggest, it's been successful on all of us to some degree, I think. This idea that we abrogate our own personal responsibility and we put all this power in these ridiculous, absurd, corrupt constructions, the government or, bureaucracy or whatever they may be, the media or whatever they might be. We give so much power from ourselves to these incredibly corrupt, I would argue, institutions, that it's quite dismaying, isn't it? And it takes me back. So in my youth, Robin, I read a lot of an author a while ago now called Philip K. Dick, who is classified as a science fiction writer. Okay, but he's a lot more than that, I would argue. So I read everything I could get a hold of as a young chap. I devoured everything, and I've noticed since then that these science fiction books that were so much more than that. So many of his writings were they became more so as he went on, were really sort of spiritualist writings hidden in the clothes of science fiction. And one of the points that he repeatedly made in almost every book in the last sort of half of his career, really from kind of 1970 onwards, was about this struggle between good and evil, most definitely, but also this observation that he made. Philip K. Dick, if you don't know him as a writer, you might well know some films that have been made from his books. You might know Blade Runner, for example, which I really recommend as a great film, and that's based on a Philip K. Dick book. It's based on a book called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and it's a good example for what I'm talking about. It's this idea, it boils it down to, and in his books, he called them androids, but they weren't robots. They weren't mechanical constructions. These androids they appeared to be people. You know, they looked like people. They spoke like people. They had the mannerisms of people, but they had no internal divine spark, or they had no real soul that could be discerned. They were lacking a certain thing, and he called it gnosis, which is an ancient Greek term which means direct knowledge of the divine, or direct connection to, you know, these higher realms. So he called it gnosis. It's a Gnostic ancient Greek term, and he argued often in these, you know, fictional books, that there was a whole lot of people, these androids, and they're everywhere, and they don't have this divine spark, this thing. And it's an upsetting proposition in some ways, and I understand that. But he argued through his books, and his books, I couldn't recommend them more highly. I mean, they're funny and they're crazy, but they're also really illuminating. You know, he argued that these androids are actually everywhere, and they're dangerous. They're actually dangerous. Their lack of empathy and their lack of connection to the human condition will be, and has been already, but will particularly be really dangerous to humankind as, you know, we go forward, you know. And I think that was a very prescient point. And I would suggest, you know, very humbly, I'm not trying to be elitist about this at all. I don't want to be elitist, but I'm just trying to get to the crux of the issue. But there does seem to be this large percentage of the population who just simply aren't grappling with these kind of issues at all. They've turned them off, or they're not there. I don't exactly know, you know. And I feel like it's dangerous ground to go on, and I understand that, but I do feel like we should, you know, we should be able to discuss any topic at all, really. But I do feel like it's dangerous ground, because you get into this perilous area where you start to potentially sound a bit like the globalists, who go, well, they're all just cattle anyway. You know, I mean, I think I understand their mindset. I'm not part of that group, obviously. But I think I have an inkling of their mindset, where they just think the greater mass of humanity are just cattle, and they're just there to be used and abused and manipulated and to be done with whatever they choose, you know. And I'll tell you a funny story, actually, well, an interesting story anyway. Years ago, I had a friend, and I probably shouldn't name him, but he worked directly for Rupert Murdoch, one of the great, I would argue, one of the great globalists. Well, I think he's also a bit of a puppet, really, but on the public stage, one of the obvious symbols of
one of the faces that we see.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, so this fellow who I was on quite friendly terms with, and I still am actually, worked directly for Rupert Murdoch, and would go into meetings, you know, with the Murdoch family and Rupert and James and Lachlan and Elizabeth and whatever, one-on-one, etc., etc. So we were having dinner one night, and I said to this chap, I said, so what are they like? What are these Murdoch monsters actually like as people? You know, I mean, do they realize how kind of evil they are? And at the time, this was at the time when the so-called Iraq war was raging, where, you know, the Murdoch press had, waved the flag for, the murder of, a million innocent Iraqi people, despicable acts as far as I can see. And, and tens of thousands of US soldiers and horrible traumatic acts. They had waved the flag for this very, very violently, and so I was like, how do these people look at themselves in the mirror, And he said, they think they're the Good Samaritans. They think that they're fighting. Oh, absolutely. Well, see, this is the thing. Everybody does. I feel like it's a bit of a human failure, maybe. Maybe it's a survival mechanism. I don't know. But everybody kind of paints themselves as the hero of their story, don't they? So the Murdochs, apparently, according to my inside source, were no exception to that. And they absolutely viewed themselves, according to this fellow, as the Good Samaritans, even when they're waving the flag for murdering, a million innocent people. They still think of themselves as the Good Samaritans because they're remaking the Middle East for democracy or some crazy nonsense. Who knows? Who knows? But I mean, my point is, it's a dangerous path to go down, isn't it? To start dividing people into inferior and superior and things. You end up at this globalist point where you might just come up with this idea of wiping out a great mass of humanity, and this sort of Garden of Eden idea where you sort of clean the slate and you want to sort of get back to basics a little bit, which I think is an ugly, evil idea myself.
Oh, yeah, awful. That's kind of well, it is most definitely disturbing, because the way that I always explain these, the elites of the world to myself, and I sit there and I wonder, how do they sleep at night, and all these sort of things.
They sleep very well.
Yeah, and well, no doubt. But I always explain it to myself as, well, they're most
silk
definitely
pillow slips, Robin. Silk pillow slips,
they're
the help come in and fluff up their beds for them. Yeah, right. They sleep very well.
So I always think, obviously, they're all sociopaths and psychopaths because, that clearly they don't have empathy for any other human being or compassion, and that's how they sleep at night. So to hear from someone who works and, has spent time with the Murdochs that they think they're the Good Samaritans, that disturbs me much more than kind of relieving myself thinking, oh, they're sociopaths and psychopaths. That's how you explain it. Oh, to hear.
Well, I think those two data points are not mutually contradictory. They can be sociopaths and psychopaths, and I think there are. I think there's something really innately wrong with them, and they can still think they're Good Samaritans. I mean, in fact, that it's not that surprising, really. I mean, I think most people in that situation, this lack of empathy, this sort of psychopath situation, probably think of themselves as the hero of their story. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen or read the book. The book is fascinating but hard going. American Psycho. I don't know if you've seen the film either.
Seen the film a long time ago.
Okay. The film's, I mean, it's confronting. I wouldn't deny the film is absolutely confronting, as the book is more so, actually. But I think it's also very funny, the film American Psycho, but it's also a very good portrait, I think, of that psychopathic viewpoint. It presents it pretty well, and in a darkly humorous kind of way, So, I mean, if this is correct, and if, these elites, and as far as I can tell, this is the situation, view the rest of humanity simply as cattle, and we're animals on their plantation to do with as they see fit. And I think that's become, it should have become screaming obvious the last 3 years. I mean, the whole operation looked, and I said this a few times, it looked like, it was hard to understand if you're, at ground zero. But if you take the perspective of the cattle farmer, it's very easy to understand. If they view the greater mass of humanity as their bovine cattle, they're going to do a cull every now and then. They're going to track and trace. They're going to scare the herd to move them in between different paddocks, between when they need them to graze on different pastures. They'll give them a fright and they'll move them over to a different paddock. They'll decide that they want to cull the weaker elements of the herd. Maybe the herd is too large and they want to pare it back a little, and they want to have as much info about the herd as possible, so they'll track them and trace them. If you look at these actions from the perspective of the cattle farmer, they all actually seem pretty straightforward, I would argue. Here you go. Look, I can't resist. I've got another good story about the Murdochs from the same source, okay? Because I was pumping this guy for as much info as I could. I was like, come on, you need to tell me about these scumbags, and it was a reasonably surreal scene, actually. I don't want to sound like an idiot, but I've got to give you the scene. So I heard from this chap, and I won't identify him because it could come back to bite him. You never know. But I was in, so I'm a musician, so I particularly in the past, in the era of not having kids and so forth, I would travel around a lot. I was on the road pretty much constantly, whatever. I was in San Francisco this particular time for a week or something or other. And this chap contacted me and said, I'm in LA meeting with the Murdochs, blah, blah, blah. Are you around? Where are you? And so, well, I'm in San Fran. And he said, oh, well, let's have dinner, And so he came down and he booked us into the poshest vegetarian restaurant in San Francisco, which at the time was this place called Millennium. I have no idea if it's there still, but it was in a former Masonic temple, and it had the checkered floor, and it had these, what I presumed would be fake French waiters with their fake French accents, serving and whatever. So we're sitting in this sort of Masonic temple being served by these fake French waiters, and I'm pumping him for as much info as I can, realizing that the whole scene is quite surreal and quite strange, going, okay, tell me about these scumbags. I want to know everything, So he told me a bunch of stuff, some of which I mentioned to you, but also one of the other great stories he told me, there was a few actually, but one of them, he told me he would have these meetings with the Murdochs, and that it would be him and one or two other people, underlings or whatever, and then often it was the family. So it was Rupert, James, Lachlan, and Elizabeth, maybe, And if there was ever a moment where the Murdoch family wanted to have a private discussion, they would bust out the Latin. So they would start speaking in Latin to each other, okay? Because they all, they have these, elite educations, I assume. So they've all learnt Latin, which the common man or woman does not speak Latin. No. But the Murdochs do. So if they wanted to have a private family conference, they'd start speaking to each other in Latin, which I thought was phenomenal. I mean, I was laughing my head off. I mean, it's like some evil characters out of the Da Vinci Code or who knows what, like it's like, whoa, it kind of almost takes me back to The Exorcist or something. You've got these sort of dark characters busting out the Latin so they can have this sort of, they can, sorry, fact checkers, so that they can conspire. I apologize, fact checkers. Yes, they conspired. Sorry. My associate who was there has a theory that they were speaking in Latin to conspire. So sorry, fact checkers. I guess that's a conspiracy theory. Sorry about that. Anyway, forgive me, please.
Well, that's thinking about, my time overseas. Whenever you're in whatever country, generally you would resort, you'd turn to English when you wouldn't want people to, and in China as well, they do the same thing, thinking that most foreigners don't speak Chinese. It happens in any country, but that's a little bit of tidbit of information for everybody about the Murdochs. Maybe is there someone here that speaks Latin? Maybe we can put them in there to infiltrate them. But talking about the media, because as most people know, I have a real problem with mainstream media, because without them, particularly over the past 3 years, and even before we started recording, David, we briefly talked about the assassination of JFK. And, you know, the CIA was responsible for introducing this term conspiracy theory to, you know, through the media. Without...
Are you alleging, Robin, that they had some ulterior motive for doing that? No. Is that where you're going with this? I'm just going to, I've got some fact checkers here, actually. I'm just going to let the fact checkers know that they need to be checking up on you, you know? Well, let's be blunt about it. I mean, let's be straightforward about it. Come on. You know, I heartily endorse what you're saying. I mean, my view is that the mainstream media, and honestly, most of the so-called alternative media as well, really, it's just a bit more subtle about it in some ways, but not always.
Yes.
But certainly the entirety of the mainstream media is like a weapon. It's like a gun pointed directly at the public's head. You know, it is the globalists or the forces of darkness or the elite controllers or the you know, the herd keepers, whatever you want to call them, these forces of darkness. It is, I would argue, probably the best weapon they have, even better than the fake political system and the fake stupid democracy scam. You know, even better than that is the fake, you know, mainstream media scam that this entity somehow cares about you and somehow wants to tell you the truth about something. I mean, the idea is absurd. It's like a ridiculous comedy. It's like Abbott and Costello or something, you know, that this enterprise, which is for the most part either directly or indirectly owned by billionaires, is your friend. I mean, the idea is just, and we all fall for it to some degree. I get it, because it's psychological warfare. It's aimed at us, you know, emotionally. I mean, most propaganda, and you mentioned propaganda earlier on, you know, I mean, most propaganda and psychological warfare is aimed at you emotionally. So it will manipulate you emotionally. So if you ever look at these arguments that they often make in the mainstream media and elsewhere, they are arguments that are purely predicated on emotional manipulation. There's no rationality to them. There's no kind of logic or reasoning or even, you know, transactional stuff that might make sense or whatever. There's none of that generally. It's just emotional. So we saw this over the last couple of years, but it's been going on for a long, long time. But we saw it very clearly over the last couple of years, you know, the emotional impact. You know, the first emotional sort of strike, artillery strike, I would argue, from the media in this example was all that fake ass footage from China, you know, of people dropping dead in the streets, blah, 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 blah. All that went all over the place. People were sending it to me. I saw it, you know, you know, we weren't prepared. You know, they caught us with the act of, you know, the element of surprise. And that's, you know, one of the key elements in warfare, because this is what it is. The term is psychological warfare. And it's not used lightly. It's a form of warfare, okay? And, you know, fear is one of the great weapons in warfare, and surprise is one of the other great weapons. So at the beginning of this, you know, chicanery, this absurd situation that we find ourselves in, we got bombarded. I mean, you know, a lot of us did. I think most of us did with this footage from China, which now looks absurd, of people dropping dead in the streets and dead bodies just lying around in the streets and all this sort of stuff that we now realize is patently ridiculous. But at the time, this stuff percolated through everywhere. It was in the mainstream media a bit. It was all over social media. All of these media platforms, I would argue, are not our friends. None of them. None of them. Okay, they're all there to manipulate us. You know, and I realize, we're on one right now. I get it. But we still have to be honest about this situation. They're all designed to be highly manipulable. So those first waves of that fake, I would suggest, footage of people dropping dead in Wuhan and bodies littering the streets, that, you know, this is psychological warfare. It's designed, and that was designed to give you an instant fear reaction, to terrorize you. and it absolutely worked. And then there were other manipulations, emotional manipulations that came down the track, and one of the obvious ones, but there are so many, is your love for your family and for your peers, and it's like, okay, so these mandates, for example, which I thought were the most disgusting thing I'd ever seen in my life, this was manipulated in the essence of your care and your empathy, for your peers and your family and your children, blah, 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 blah. Do this thing, comply to this obscene mandate because of your love of these people, which of course is the most basic kind of emotional manipulation, and people weaponize that in all sorts of directions. So, we're seeing the really basic sort of pillars of psychological warfare, and they're right in front of our faces.
Well, this is one of the things that I've talked about, which I think is really important, is that people be able to identify the different tools that they use. So, talking about creating an emotive response from people and getting them to act immediately, especially on social media, because it's instantaneous. Not only is the receiving the information instantaneous, but people's reactions are, and the different, there's a whole list of, these weapons that they use against us, like the OODA loop theory. That's where they, elicit an instantaneous emotional response from you. And I think if people can identify these things, they can spot them and realize, oh, okay, this is what's happening. This is causing me to immediately respond. I'm being played right now, and I need to not engage because it's on purpose. And if I engage in that, I'm participating and giving away my power. So I think if people can identify these things, it would be really helpful to not continue giving away your power, and your personal responsibility and your moral responsibility. Even the what is it called? The Milgram experiment, where they were shocking people. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are, but it makes me think about how people were so willing to segregate others, even their most loved people in their family. They were willing to segregate them, and I can't help but feel like that experiment itself was used to do something to us, during
absolutely. So look, I completely agree. We're in the middle of a psychological warfare operation. We absolutely are, and you're absolutely right. There are telltale signs, and the Milgram experiment is one of them. I mean, they've identified whoever is ultimately behind this thing has studied and employed the best minds who understand, unfortunately, human psychology very well. They understand that fear has some very obvious effects on people. And one of them is fear drives people towards authority, because fear makes people seek security. Okay. And they have this, I would suggest, a delusion that authority offers them security. So I would argue that this has been obvious for the last couple of years, but I would argue this has been going on for a long, long time previously. We've grown up, Robin, I would suggest, under this sort of rubric of this sort of constant fear regime. Like when I was a kid, it was the Cold War and the fact that we would probably, and I as a child, and I remember we all felt this way, that we would probably die in a nuclear war, and that was a great way to terrify people and to keep them under control, because fear drives people towards authority. This is well established in psychological terms. So you had, this threat of nuclear annihilation. Then you had the hole in the ozone layer. You had acid rain. You had the Arab terrorists. You had AIDS, whatever. All of these things, they are to one degree or another, I would argue, fake. But they're all there. And you'll notice they never have two happening at once. So when they were about to, just before they rolled out this latest fear operation, they had the war on terror, you know, mad bombers, ISIS bullshit operation. I would suggest it's all completely fake. It's all run by the intelligence agencies. It's all absolutely fake as all hell. But it stops. It immediately stops the moment they want to roll out the biosecurity fear campaign. ISIS, for example, there's plenty of examples, but to give you one example, ISIS goes on holiday. They take an RDO, you know, they take a rostered day off for a couple of years. All of a sudden, this bloodthirsty group who hate us because of our freedoms and want to destroy democracy and blah, 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 all this bullshit, they disappear.
It's almost like magic.
They get worried about the flu or what, they don't want to catch a cold, you know. And you know, in you know, the Tora Bora Mountains, they don't want to catch a cold there, so they take 3 years off. You know, look, and it's darkly funny. You know, it gets darkly funny, and I realize it's darkly funny. You know, but it gets darkly funny because I noticed that ISIS just disappeared, and the whole fake ass war on terror just vanished overnight when there was a new thing, because they know psychologically that if you're terrorized by multiple things at once, you're probably just going to fall in a heap, okay? You know, and you're not really going to respond to any of them. It's just going to turn into this blob of amorphous fear, you know, so it needs to be a bit strategic. So they move one off the stage. It's like a stage play, really. They move one background off the stage. Okay, there goes ISIS. Whoop, they're gone. And here comes, you know, the sniffles. You're going to be terrorized of the Wuhan sniffles. Here it is. We're putting that on the center of the stage now. Look at this. You know, and it was darkly funny because I noticed something a little while ago. Someone sent it to me. It was some statement from ISIS, which is just a creation of the intelligence agencies, as far as I can tell. That, you know, to their, I think it was literally, I don't know if it was The Onion or Babylon Bee or not, but it appeared to be kind of real, but who knows these days. But it was ISIS telling their suicide bombers to get vaccinated. In fact, insisting that they get vaccinated. I'm not sure. It didn't look like the Babylon Bee, but gosh, it's hard to tell sometimes.
Just, you know, even trying to, you know, see if you can authenticate that communication. But, you know, the mental gymnastics, if that's actually legitimate, you know, what kind of mental gymnastics do you have to do?
What's legitimate in there? Because as far as I can determine, ISIS is, I mean, I'm not saying that people haven't died. I'm sure people have died in horrible ways. I'm not arguing that. But I'm arguing that as an entity, ISIS is not what it pretends to be, okay? As far as I can determine, it's an absolute creation of the intelligence agencies for geopolitical and other reasons, you know? So I'm arguing it's fake on that level. I'm not saying that some people haven't died in horrible ways. I'm sure they have, you know? But so this fake entity is making a fake statement about fake stuff. I'm not sure if really on a sort of philosophical level that you can authenticate that, because what's to authenticate? Did the real fake ISIS make that genuinely fake statement about their fake views? I get a bit lost. I'm a simple guy. I'm a hillbilly, and you're starting to lose me there. You know, like, I don't know.
Just thinking about trying to, you know, identify things like that. I think one of the really huge things I'd like to kind of say to people watching is that we often use the word distraction, and you know, it's kind of like a sequence, as you just described. It's like a stage play where, you know, one character moves off and we have the next one, and then we often talk about, we have things that move onto the stage, if you like, that are a distraction. And I think we've really become numb to the real meaning that's behind, or what's actually going on behind that distraction. What's actually happening is that, and I like your cattle analogy there, we're being redirected, you know, we're being moved to another paddock. And I think people, I'm going to start using the word redirected and not distracted, because that really doesn't mean anything anymore. We just go, oh, it's a distraction, don't worry, blah, blah, blah. But people still pay attention to it when we're being manipulated. Even people that are awake are being manipulated. Yeah. So I think it's really important.
We're all being manipulated, Robin. We are all being manipulated, okay? We can only do our best in this scheme.
100%.
We all, I mean, look, I'm going to enter the twilight zone here, so forgive me, but I do see this whole media situation as a fairly occult device. You know, I do actually, honestly, forgive me, but I see it as a black magic construction, really. I mean, it's doing all of these things that you're talking about, redirecting, distracting, focusing. It's doing all of these things, but it's also creating through its assumptions, because the media is built on all these assumptions about things, and they just assume that everybody agrees about all this stuff, okay? And I would argue that most of it, maybe even all of it, is entirely fraudulent. All of these assumptions, you know, and I can, you know, I could list hundreds of them for you, really, you know, but there are some obvious ones, you know. I mean, that the media is legitimate. I mean, why? Why is this thing owned by this bunch of blood-sucking billionaires in any way legitimate, or it has in any way your best interests at heart? I mean, are you serious? I mean, a second one, there are so many. A second one, our fake democracy thing, it's completely fake. I mean, come on, it's so fake. You know, oh, here's vote for Tweedledum, this idiot who's going to, you know, say some crap that they think you want to hear this week. Vote for that idiot. Yeah, we'll put that idiot in. He's going to do whatever he's told. I mean, when do you ever see any of this actual democracy in action? When do any of these idiots ever do anything they say they're going to do? It never happens. It never happens. Okay, never.
Two cheeks
why
of the same
do we keep falling for this? I'll tell you why we keep falling for it. I ask myself sometimes, as I'm sure you do, why do we keep falling for this? The reason we keep falling for it is it's because it's a very elaborate black magic trick. It's an illusion. It's a stage magician's black magic illusion, moving the balls around, moving the coconut shells around to, as you say, redirect, distract, confuse, befuddle, you know, and so you still believe this rubbish when these idiots are paraded in front of you and they argue about some stupid crap, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Then idiot A gets in for his little run at fame and fortune, never does anything in the public interest. I mean, name me the things that government actually does that are in the interests of the general public. I mean, nothing. I mean, really, nothing, really.
No. And the phrase that I always use is that they're two cheeks of the same ass. You know, I don't have any faith.
And it's an ugly ass too, Robin. There are some good asses in the world, but that ass is ugly. You know, like. And it, well, just to run with your analogy, and I don't mean to steal your analogy, but just to run with it, you know, you're offered up the left cheek, you know, oh, look at that left cheek. Oh, it's going to make your life so much better. It's going to promise you some shit that's never going to happen. Oh, here comes the right cheek to save the day. That cheek's going to fix up the mistakes of the left ass cheek, blah, 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 blah. It's an ugly, wilting, you know, wart-infested ass, you know.
Yeah.
Seriously, why do we fall for this? I know why we fall for it. It's psychological warfare, and it's well designed. I mean, sometimes it's so obvious, but look, I want to hold up a book. I'm a big fan of this book. Today, we're recording this on the 22nd of November, 2023. It's the 60th anniversary of the John F. Kennedy assassination. Some of you won't care about that. That's fine, you know, but I do think it's important, especially in our discussion. You know, we're talking about psychological warfare. Well, I think that act was a huge operation of psychological warfare. I think it was one of those moments. You may well disagree. You're free to disagree. It's fine. But I do think it's one of those moments, and we've seen a few now, haven't we, where the curtain rolls back a little bit, and we see the magician behind the curtain for a moment, and there's a great book. It's hard to find, but I'm speaking to the guy who owns it, and he's going to reissue it sometime soon, called False Mystery. And it was written by a chap called Vincent Salandria. He was a JFK assassination researcher, a very good one. But he argued in this book that, for example, and I'm just using this as an example, that the Kennedy assassination, as fascinating as it is, and it's an incredible whodunit and blah, 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 and all that sort of stuff, but it's also designed as a false mystery. He argued that there was no mystery about the Kennedy assassination whatsoever. They murdered him in plain sight to display their power, that they can replace the king. If the king goes off track, or if he gets awkward or inconvenient, he can have his head blown off in public, and there's nothing that you can do about it. It was an incredible psychological warfare operation to make it plain to the public. He argues that it's a false mystery. There's no mystery about it whatsoever. They murdered him in public because it suited them to do so, and to traumatize the average folk, to traumatize us, because consciously or subconsciously, so many people would have gone, well, if they can murder the president in plain daylight because he's doing something they don't like, or he's getting in the way of some operation or whatever is inconvenient to somebody, well, what can they do to me? So you're talking about this sort of mass psychological event to get the herd back on the plantation. Okay, cattle. You can go down the rabbit hole of shooters in the sewer drains, or the 3 Oswalds and blah blah blah. And I've done it. The 3 tramps and blah 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 blah. All this stuff. And it's all very interesting. Yep. But lesson number 1 is, hey, cattle, we can blow the most powerful guy in the world's head off. He's clearly not the most powerful guy in the world, is he? We can blow his head off in public.
They've just done that in China with Li Keqiang, the what would you call him? The premier, if you like, of mainland China. He was murdered, and there's it's now found that he was poisoned, and that his death has had such a profound effect on the population of mainland China, and that is a complete psychological operation. And as you've just said, so that Xi Jinping can assert his authority not only on the population but also of the members of the CCP, and it continues. So I think even with what was that fella's name that shot all the people in Tasmania in the 90s?
Martin Bryant.
Even with that, I said last night that I really don't care about all of the this and that and this and that and this and that. The fact of the matter is that the government were responsible for that because they wanted to initiate the disarming of the Australian population. And, the circumstances surrounding Martin Bryant I love the title of that book, False Mystery, because people are talking about Martin Bryant and this and that and this and that. The fact of the matter is the government had something to do with that for a particular reason and a particular outcome. That's just the truth of it.
As they often say in the legal profession, not that I'm a fan of the legal profession, but as they often used to say, at least, cui bono, which is Latin. I'm enjoying that, for who benefits. Who benefits from this situation? Okay, when we we never had really, but maybe when we had a semi-functional legal system, we certainly don't have one anymore. Who knows? But people would sometimes ask, who benefits from this situation? Okay, is a pretty good indicator of who might have a motivation to make this situation happen. So, as you correctly, I would suggest, point out that Port Arthur mass slaying situation, whatever, as you point out, the details may or may not be, a certain structure got precisely what it wanted out of that. You can always smell these things, no matter what the details may or may not be. You can always smell these things because all of a sudden, we've got this legislation that we just happened to be able to write the 900 pages of it in 3 days, and we just happen to have it ready now a couple of weeks later. So let's push this legislation through while everyone's emotionally blinded and traumatized by these supposed events. Here's something I prepared a little earlier. So let's just push this through. I mean, it's a dead giveaway, isn't it? I mean, after 9/11, they pushed through the Patriot Act. It was like 1,400 pages of legislation that they just happened to have sitting around,
I think that's one of your ta-da moments, David.
Yeah, ta-da. I was using it as the doorstop, but look, it's actually pretty good. So let's ram this through Congress. I mean, it's always a bit of a dead giveaway, and they can only get away with it because we, the public, are mesmerized in this occult magic show. We're dazzled by the shifting colors and the lights. Oh, Trump said this, Biden, mumbled that thing, or whatever. The lights, the colors move, the sets change. Oh, whoa. Yeah. Meanwhile, they push through this thing, that thing. And every one of these situations, coincidentally, results in the noose getting tighter on us and the plantation getting smaller and the electric fences being turned on. And actually, as a friend of mine pointed out recently, after the last couple of years, he said, and I thought it was a very good point, he said, look, they've been building this electric fence for decades, but now they've turned it on. Okay, they've been building the structure for a long time, but now they've pressed the on switch. Okay, and here we go.
I think Dr. Robert Malone uses that electric fence analogy as well. And speaking about Dr. Malone, he talks about what's called a limited hangout. And I thought this was really interesting to actually have a term for this, because particularly over the past 3 years, people will praise the MSM for putting out those little bits of truth. And you just said, you see the magician behind the curtain for a second, right? And you think that the truth is coming out. And the mainstream media do this all the time, and people clap, oh, yay, it's finally in mainstream media. No. And Malone explains it great, that, this limited hangout, they put those little bits of information out. You think the truth is getting out there, but they're not. They've actually got the the truth held up within this electric fence, which they don't want you to go inside. They don't want you to talk about it. They don't want other people to see it. So they'll put a little bit of truth out to make people believe that it's getting out there, when actual fact.
Well, they have to maintain, because the mainstream media, I would argue, is probably the best weapon they have against the public.
Yeah,
they have to maintain. They have to maintain some tiny vestige of credibility. I don't know quite how they do it, but in the mainstream media, look, at last they're going to tell this truth about things. They're going to turn around. I know that they're going to just turn around soon and they'll be on our side. Nah, it's all a game. It's an ugly game, but it's a game. They're doing that to maintain, for want of a better term, as a friend of mine says, for Joe and Jane six-pack, your average folk who aren't paying a ton of attention, and I have nothing against them. I understand why they're not paying a ton of attention. But, for people who aren't paying a ton of attention, they'll go, oh, okay, so the media is kind of balanced or honest or something like this. And, of course, that's complete nonsense. It's completely controlled. I mean, I would argue, my suspicion is that the bulk, if not all of the mainstream media is basically like an arm of the intelligence agencies or some other group like that. And I would argue that's obvious because of the coordination. Okay, when it matters, I mean, when it doesn't matter, they have their different flavors and they pretend to care about this social cause and that social cause and whatever, blah, blah, blah. It's all rubbish. But when it matters, they're all on point precisely. Okay, like in lockstep, completely to the nanosecond when it matters. Okay, and to me that indicates a higher level of control, a certain apparatus which is above all these supposedly separate and different flavors of media, left, right, hipster, blah, blah, whatever, it's all irrelevant at a certain higher level. They're all completely controlled. And, you've seen this. There's you've seen what I appreciate the term limited hangout. I would argue that you see this limited hangout possibly most obviously on Fox and Sky News. They'll argue a little bit against a little bit of this stuff so that there's somewhere where they can corral, because there will be a segment of the population. I actually think it's quite a large segment, probably 10 to 20%. That would be my guess, who are not on board, who have their suspicions, who have questions. So if you're building this cattle pen, you need somewhere to put them. Okay, you can't have them running around in the general paddock causing problems. You've got to put them somewhere. Okay, so you put them at Sky News or Fox or whatever. Some of this Murdoch rubbish. Murdoch's not a good guy. He's not your friend. Okay, so you put them somewhere. So you have a bit of this limited hangout, as you say, and they argue a little bit. Oh, yeah, they went a bit far with that, or, it's not so good, or blah, blah, blah. I'll notice that these things, and I'm deeply suspicious of them, they never, ever suggest any action, like, what are you going to do about it? No. They always lose. They lose every cause that they argue in favor of. They lose. And I think that's deliberate. And they're just there to corral the people. These naturally, you will have natural dissidents of some number, and you need to put them somewhere. So you put them there. So let off a bit of steam. Let the pressure cooker be open a bit. Let them get a bit angry about a few social issues and blah blah blah. But when it matters, okay, when it's time for a war or when it's time for some big psychological operation, they're all on exactly the same page.
100%. And that's another thing people can go and, look up, speaking earlier about identifying things and being able to spot them, with the OODA loop theory, blah, blah, blah. Also, if you're not familiar with the term lockstep, go and have a look at it. If you're not familiar with the Five Eye Nations, go and have a look, because being able to see through the bullshit, reading the media, and I don't mean physically reading it, I mean being able to identify what they're doing, I find extremely helpful anyway to
it's like really. I'm guilty of doing the same thing, Robin. I try and read their tea leaves. I try and, as I see you do, I try and read between the lines of their bullshit. Okay, so what are they up to next? What are they pushing next? And to some degree, it's a useful thing to do if you can decode the mainstream media, because they're always pushing an agenda. They're always pushing. They also do what I call, I don't know what other people call it, but I call it foreshadowing. Okay, so I've often seen this. They do a lot of foreshadowing. Oh, this thing's coming up next, to prepare people psychologically, because it's psychological warfare. That's prepare people. I remember seeing this just before the those horrible Bali bombings. Before the big bomb went off in the nightclub in Bali, right? Hugely dubious situation, hugely suspicious situation. Let's not go into the details now, but I observed at the time that they wanted to invade Iraq at the time. Okay, they wanted to bomb the hell out of Iraq and invade Iraq for other geopolitical reasons, let's put it like that. And the bulk of the population were not into it. Okay, and for what they're worth, polling's highly dubious. I get it, but even in they're letting out these polls that saying that 80% of the Australian population were not into it, did not support invading Iraq, blah, 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 for whatever that's worth. But I think there was a huge groundswell. I went on huge marches against it before it happened, blah, blah, blah. There's your democracy in action. Huge amounts of the population totally against it. Guess what? It's going to happen anyway. It was obvious, But there was a big groundswell against this thing. And all of a sudden, in the media, Herald, Sun, The Age, blah, 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 they're all all run by the same people. Don't worry. All of a sudden there was like, intelligence agencies are saying that there'll be a terrorist attack on Australian soil. They're concerned, there's chatter that there's going to be a huge scale terrorist attack. I remember this really clearly. And I went, they're foreshadowing here. They're preparing the public. They're preparing them for a shock. Okay. Get ready. This is going to happen. And bang, 2 weeks later, this bomb goes off in Bali. Very traumatic experience for Australia. Bali's sort of like the, kind of Australia's sort of, sandpit, isn't it, really? Australians go to, have a bit of sandpit kindergarten time, and very, very tender underbelly for Australia, It was all constructed, I would argue. I think it's a pretty good example of, here we go. We'll use the media to prepare people for what is happening and how they should respond, how they should feel about it, how traumatic it is. The whole thing is a psychological operation. I'll give you one other example, and there are many, of this psychology that they use against us in this psychological warfare and in this psychological weapon, and that is people's really strong desire to belong to the group. Okay, this has long been identified in psychology, and you saw this over the last couple of years, all this stuff about, 60% of the population got jabbed, 72% of the population, all this driving, all this nudging to tell people you got to stay in the group. Okay, the group, the majority, I think all this information is completely fake. All the numbers are fake. They're all just made up nonsense. Okay, but it's there to drive you to go, most people think this. Most people are doing this. Okay, and psychologically, the majority of people want to belong to the group. We're social animals. We're social beings. We want to be accepted by the group. So if you're telling us, most people are doing this, most people are thinking this, maybe I'm a bit of a weirdo and I'm outside of the group. Okay. Well, I should realign my thinking or my feelings or my thoughts or my questions with the group identity. So they use this a lot. And all this polling stuff, it's all about nudging people into accepting and thinking what they should be thinking.
So, David, just to, I really appreciate you joining me for this conversation.
My pleasure, but probably not yours.
Oh, no. No, because I
can go on a little. I apologize.
Yeah, no, don't apologize. No, ever. Don't ever. I'm just, because I want to ask you what advice you could give to people, or how we combat that or protect our minds, because, not only does it impact, our perception or our behavior or our psychology or our morals, all these sorts of things, it also impacts our sense of sovereignty, which is really, and we touched on it before, which is a vital part of being a human. And even awake people, we've just said, not only are we programmed, but we're impacted.
We're all programmed.
Psychological warfare as well. Yeah. So what would you say to people, how can we, either protect our minds or combat it, or
it's a big topic, Robin. I mean, I think we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours, to be honest. I mean, what I would suggest, firstly, and these are very humble suggestions, I'm really no expert on this whatsoever, but very humbly, I would suggest, have a look at assumptions. Have a look at the assumptions that are transmitted to us through the media, through the education system, through the basic fabric of our society. I would suggest very humbly that all of these assumptions are open to question. Okay, all of this framework that we've been given, our ideas about history, about events, about the 20th century, about the validity and the legitimacy of our social institutions, government, the medical system, academia, the media. we have all these assumptions about these things programmed into us. Look, very humbly, I would suggest I try and do this, but we're all trapped to some degree, and I recognize that, but I would just suggest step back. If you can, take a few steps back and go, what are the assumptions at play here? What am I assuming? Is there real evidence for, half of these things or any of these things? One thing that I do, and I can only, transmit my humble, bumbling, hillbilly little ideas, but one thing that I do quite often actually is where we live, you can see the stars in the night sky very clearly. We're lucky in that regard. I look up at the night sky and I look up at the stars and the planets and whatnot. And I feel very humble in that situation. I go, well, there's this whole universe that exists as far as I can determine. I'm just this little speck of dust blowing through this universe. I will exist in some fashion for some period of time, and then I will not exist in that fashion, and then I will become part of some other things and whatnot, and that's all fine. I'm comfortable with all of that. Step back, look at the universe, look at how mysterious it is, and I think it's profoundly mysterious. I think my view is that we are not equipped to understand the mechanics, the vast, impenetrable mechanics of the universe. I'm not suggesting that you don't try. I try. I think it's a good and noble pursuit to try and understand our place in the universe, but I think ultimately we can't, and that we should be humble about that and at ease with that. Whatever your spiritual orientation may be, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But I think one of the benefits of a spiritual outlook is that it reminds us that we are just specks of dust, or whatever terms you want to use, blowing through the universe. We don't know everything. Let's not be arrogant about things. We really, I don't want to get nasty about things, but I have to admit that I hold atheists in low regard for a number of reasons. But one of the first reasons is I think this idea that we know everything is incredibly arrogant. Yeah. And I try and be really at ease with the idea that I will never know everything. It's not possible, and it's not even right for me to know everything or even understand everything. I'm just this little speck of dust bumbling its way through the universe, trying to do the best that it can do. There are forces at play that are way beyond me. There are, I think, and I think it's been deliberate, this campaign to convince us that there is no good and there is no evil. I think it's been a very deliberate campaign. I think there is definitely good and there is definitely evil. Do I understand them completely? No, I do not. But I can identify them. I think this occult stage play, this occult theater, elections, political personalities, celebrities, blah, 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 blah. It's all a bit of an occult stage play to capture our individual strength and the joy that we should feel. I know we live in arduous times. I absolutely understand that. And there is a lot going on. But I do think that we should have joy and celebrate being alive. Because as I say to my kids every now and then, and this is probably a dumb thing to say, I have no idea, but there's a lot of dead people who really wish that they were alive, okay? And so we're alive, and we should celebrate the fact that we're alive and that we're bumbling our way through this incredible creation, this incredible universe. Let's resist this psychological warfare as much as we can for the benefit of ourselves and our children and our families and our communities. They're what really matters. I would argue that our children are what the highest thing that we have. They are the future. Let's identify this psychological warfare for what it is. It is an instrument that is used to oppress us and to diminish our possibility. But let's also celebrate the fact that we're alive. and we're still engaged in the struggle.
Well, I think that's a fabulous place to end the stream, David. I couldn't add anything to that, actually, and I couldn't agree more. It's good to take a step
Thank you,
back,
Robert.
said.
Just the humble thoughts of some bumbling hillbilly, I'll get back to whittling on the veranda and, spitting out my backy and whatever, Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's fabulous. Well, I want to say thank you very much for joining me, David, and
Pleasure.
I'm sure the audience is thrilled to see you on social
that'll be
media.
Short-lived, Robin. I'll open my mouth and that'll vanish within a heartbeat. But bless them all.
Yeah, no, it's great. All right, so I'll say farewell to you, David, and to the audience as well. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Bye for now.
See ya.
Life is so sweet, only sometimes. Oh yeah, our life is so rich. I hope tonight. Oh, our life is so rich, only sometimes. I hope tonight it will be alright. Are you ready for a run with me tonight? Come on round, oh yeah. Thank you.